second scripture reading comes from Acts 17, verses 1 through 9, and this is just a continuation of this saga that we're hearing about in Acts of the early Christian missionaries as the gospel goes forth. Hear the word now as it comes to us from this book. After Paul and Silas had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days argued with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, "This is the Messiah, Jesus, whom I am proclaiming to you." Some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews became jealous, and with the help of some ruffians in the marketplace, they formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. While they were searching for Paul and Silas to bring them out to the assembly, they attacked Jason's house. When they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some believers before the city authorities, shouting, "These people who have been turning the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has entertained them as guests. They are all acting contrary to the decrees of the emperor, saying that there is another king named Jesus." The people and the city officials were disturbed when they heard this, and after they had taken bail from Jason and the others, they let them go. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Do you ever feel like you can't get ahead? Maybe it's yard work. That's why I like this time of year. Things have kind of slowed down growing, and there's not as much to do, but boy, those leaves are coming down. They're coming down soon. Maybe for you, it is savings. You just can't get ahead on saving, creating this emergency fund that Dave Ramsey talks about. I know some millennials in my life, and this is their plight. They cannot get ahead on savings. Did you know that millennials have taken out 300% more in student loans than their parents? They cannot get ahead. There aren't the jobs that pay them well enough to pay back these student loans. So maybe you're like a millennial in spirit. You can't get ahead either. You just can't seem to save enough. For me, it is laundry. I just can't get ahead. I'm like, why are you guys wearing clothes all the time? Just stop. So getting ahead, we all kind of want to have this sense that, finally, I'm just ahead of whatever it is that's bogging me down. That's what it felt like for these early Christian missionaries. I think sometimes they wondered, will we ever get ahead? It was like one step forward, 2 steps back. What happened for Paul and Silas, they traveled from Philippi to Thessalonica, and this was an important city. It had a synagogue in it, and Paul went in and started preaching this same message of Jesus, the Messiah, the one who suffered. And he actually was very successful in this particular synagogue. There were some Jews that converted, some Greeks, some maybe Greek Jewish believers. And then there were some leading women even who converted. Paul was having some success there in that synagogue. He was having so much success, evidently, it was enough to get the attention of some of those Jews who were not persuaded. They stood up and took notice. The text says that they were jealous of what was going on in the synagogue, and so they hatched a plan. They decided that they would create a little chaos in the city. They went to the marketplace, found some ruffians, it says, and they had these ruffians, these terrorists, go out into the city and just wreak havoc. They went into the house of Jason, and Jason, housed Paul and Silas, the text says. Jason was probably one of those Greek Jewish believers. We know from his name, it's a Greek name. And he had probably recently converted and said, come and stay with me in my house. Well, they drag poor hapless Jason out of his house, probably alarm the family. Who knows what they thought that they were going to do to Jason? And so they created just enough chaos to plant fear into the hearts of not only the converts, but everybody in town. So eventually the goal was to force Paul and Silas out. Have you ever seen Looney Tunes fights? If you can picture what happens on Looney Tunes when a couple people get in a fight, say Elmer Fudd and Daffy Duck. And all of a sudden they're in a fight, and all you see is this cloud of dust. And maybe there's like a black elbow of Daffy, or Elmer's rifle that sticks out of this cloud of dust, but you have no idea who is winning the fight in a Looney Tunes fight because of this cloud of dust that's kicked up. Well, that's what I picture it being like in Thessalonica. The people who opposed the gospel wanted to kick up a big enough cloud of dust so that people had no idea who had started the fight and who was winning the fight. Nobody would know who had the upper hand. I wonder if this had gone on, how I would react if I had been one of those new converts. I might have just thought, Paul just preached for 3 weeks. He was not there a long time. After 3 weeks of trying something new, I might just say, forget it. I don't know if these people, if all the violence and the fear is worth being a part of. I wonder if I might feel like this woman that I know named Laurie, who became a Christian about 10 or 15 years ago. And at first, all was really going well for Laurie. She was a home health nurse, and when she became a Christian, she all of a sudden felt this purpose in her job. She was not just caring for people who were sick, she was offering the love of Christ to them, even if she didn't say it out loud. But sometimes she did offer to pray with people if she got the sense that they were people of faith or maybe open to that. And she did. She ended up praying with people in their home, and it was very meaningful. Laurie also, when she would go home, she found new purpose. She and her husband would have people over for dinner that were just lonely people that wanted community. She and her husband wanted more community, so they started practicing hospitality more intentionally. So everything was really going well for Laurie. And then about 5 years in, the political winds started to shift, and it became more difficult to bring up the name of God with people that she didn't know very well. Because sometimes she would face opposition and she thought, wow, I didn't want to start a fight here. I didn't want to start an argument. But there was just enough chaos. These relationships that had been very peace-filled were all of a sudden tense. And then she would go on Facebook, and she had this nice, diverse group of Facebook friends, which is nice when things are going well, but when people are disagreeing in society, it's kind of a pain to go on Facebook and just watch the arguments as they unfold. Laurie started to get to the point where she said, I don't think I want to engage with the world anymore. Why would I ever bring up the subject of God if I'm just going to get clobbered? I wonder if the new converts in Thessalonica felt a little bit like a man named Randy that I know. Randy's life was going along fine, and then in the last year, he got a divorce, he got a major illness, he went into bankruptcy, and he lost a very close loved one. Everything just went downhill for Randy. And he was confused. He started to, the clarity that he once had about life and his faith, it just all of a sudden became this big cloud of dust. He didn't know who was winning anymore. It certainly felt like God was powerless. Well, that's what it feels like. I think Randy and Laurie represent what all of us can feel sometimes when faith is going along fine, and then all of a sudden, something happens. The world gets turned upside down in one way or another, and you start doubting. You start wondering if the gospel is making a difference, or if the dark forces of sin will just have the upper hand in the end. I know it can certainly feel like this as a church. You know, we can look around at the ministries that are going on in our church and be very filled with hope. You know, we've got kids in Sunday school. Isn't it so good to see these kids up here every week? And they're engaged. Good things are happening with our children in this church. And then there are the mission things that we're engaged with. If you have helped with Family Promise, and it's coming up soon, I would encourage you to do it. You know it's very hopeful to come to the church and see families that are sticking together and are making it through this really hard time. We can do that. It's something that we're partnering with other churches to provide here in Spokane. The Guatemala mission that we've got going on, there are women who have a trade now, who are making money for their families because of the ministry that you all began. And then, people in North and South Carolina are receiving clean water because you have given to the 1 Great Hour of Sharing. Maybe you've given to disaster relief. There are really good things going on in the church. But if we take our eyes off of that, sometimes it just takes walking out of the building and turning on the radio, we get overwhelmed. All of a sudden, it's a cloud of dust, and we have no idea if God is really in control. I was recently reading this book, and I'm really excited about it. It's called Pastrix, and it's about this woman. It's a memoir of a pastor in Denver. Her name's Nadia Bolz-Weber. The subtitle is The Cranky, Beautiful Faith of a Sinner and Saint. She's salty. I warn you, if you order this on Amazon, you have to kind of have thick skin for language and that kind of thing. But anyway, and she's got tattoos all up and down her arm. But she is a Lutheran minister in Denver. And she had a very specific call. She started a church plant for the ELCA, Lutheran Church. And it was, all the charter members were people on the margins. People who were homeless, people who were struggling with addictions or were recovering, people who had been abandoned by their families for one reason or another. So it was a very specific call. It's a beautiful story of this church getting started, but it was a rocky start, and there were some times when she doubted her call. She said she went through this crisis where she started having these voices in her head that were creating chaos. Here's what some of these voices said to her. Most new churches fail in the first 18 months. Get ready for public humiliation. You're not cut out for this. Get ready for everyone else to find that out. You've had a good run writing sermons, but now it's over. Get ready to fail. She said that they were like lyrics that got stuck in her head like a demonic pop song. And just when she was really about to throw in the towel, she recalled these words of a Lutheran theologian that she had read. And this is the central thing. From an earthly perspective, evil can seem so pervasive as to be unstoppable. But from a heavenly perspective, evil rages on earth, not because it is so powerful, but because it is so vulnerable. Satan desperately rages on earth because he knows he has already lost. Recalling these words gave her the energy and the encouragement that she needed to keep going in ministry. Evil rages in the world because it has already lost. Now, for Paul and Silas and their opponents, you think about the chaos they created in town, how they turned the world upside down in response to Paul and Silas and their message. They tried to wreak havoc in the city, not because they were powerful and because they were doing it from a place of authority, but because they were weak. They knew they were losing. And so they were raging desperately to create a distraction. This is the reality that we get to live with too. Evil knows it has already lost. We don't need to fear. We don't have to hold back in our ministry because God has gone before us. Paul and Silas knew this, and that's why Paul kept preaching the gospel, just like Brad said in the junior sermon. He kept on track with his message of a suffering Messiah, because it was through suffering that the world was redeemed. What would it be like if you saw the world and all its chaos, this whole cloud of dust that we live in right now? What would happen if you saw the world from this perspective, confident that Christ had already won? Would you be as fearful as you are right now? As filled with anxiety when you watch the news? Would you be as hesitant to give your life away in service, to reach out to someone different from yourself? Would you be as hesitant to advocate for the most vulnerable, to put yourself out there on behalf of someone else? Would you hesitate to give more of what makes your life comfortable away? An email caught my eye this last week. It was from the Presbyterian Mission Agency, and it said, "Young adult volunteers are turning the world upside down." It caught my eye because this is what I was preaching on. This was what the opponents said to Paul and Silas. "Oh, you're turning the world upside down," which, yes, they were. But young adult volunteers, turning the world upside down. So I clicked on it. I wanted to read the full article. And it's time for young adult volunteers to make their application to this program. This program is kind of like a faith-based Peace Corps for 19 to 30-year-olds. I started reading some of their blogs written by millennials, these people who cannot get ahead in life. And many of them graduate from college and they really don't know what they're going to do. Many of them end up serving overpriced lattes and trying to chip away with those tips at their student loans. Well, these millennials were a little different. They saw another option. They applied to the Young Adult Volunteer Program, and they gave 1 or 2 years of their life after they graduated from college to serve somewhere in the United States or around the world. There was one woman who served in Northern Ireland, and because she started listening to the stories, she thought she understood why there was so much violence, but when she started listening, it all became a lot more clear to her And she came home with this renewed sense of how much listening to other people would help dialogue. This other man served in Colombia, and he worked every day with preschoolers of low-income families. And he would read to these preschoolers. And, there were hard days, but as he looked back and he was writing this blog, he could see not only that it was time well spent with those kids, he had been transformed so much. He wasn't filled with hopelessness for the world. He had definitely a sense of purpose and a sense of call. Each of these young adults had chosen love and sacrifice over hopelessness and fear. And they had rediscovered the power of the gospel. You may not be a millennial, but I bet that there are days when you are lacking in hope. Cling to our faith at this point in the suffering Messiah, the one who already overcame the world. Let us pray.